Normally, I do not do videos back to back like this, but the great and powerful Chris Wiest, who,
Right.
if many of you guys don't know who Chris is, I think most of you do. But the fact in Kentucky right now, you can go to church and let's see what else. What else have you travel,
Protest travel.
protest at the Capitol, are all because of the work of Chris, who does it from the goodness of his heart, not for any other reasons. Because Chris is a true believer in liberty. And we wanted to discuss, there's three bills worth discussing, and one of them that require, some of them require a little more intricacies to them, and one of them's HB 208. And I think what's interesting about it is we have us, who, like you and me, who are saying the bill does this, and you have the bill's author and sponsor who's saying, Regina Huff, who's saying the bill does this.
So let's be clear. It's not just Representative Huff. I mean, it's House leadership. I just saw Representative Kim King just put out a release on this, a couple hours ago. I mean, there's a lot of House Republicans that are talking about what they think. And I don't know, are they, is it an honestly held view, or are they like deliberately misleading people? I don't know. I'm not here to ascribe motives to any of their public statements. I think the public needs to do that for themselves. But I think we should talk about what 208 does and doesn't do. And, I think that that's important. And I think to understand what 208 does, you have to understand what default Kentucky law is going in, right? What does the law require? What's the starting point? What does the law require? And, we filed a lawsuit maybe 3 weeks ago, and we asserted two claims. One was that the provision of non-traditional instruction violated Section 168 of the Kentucky's Constitution under a case known as Rose versus Council for Better Education. It was the seminal big school funding case that went on, I think it was 1989. And in it, the Kentucky Supreme Court talked about how educational opportunities need to be equal or roughly equal between counties. And so one of the arguments we made in the school reopening case that's, we could talk about in a minute, that's going to go up on appeal and, that's got a class certification motion pending to make it statewide is educational opportunity across the state. And, it's interesting. One of the few things that the legislature has to fund and has to provide for is an efficient system of common schools in the Commonwealth under Section 168 of the Kentucky Constitution. And then, there's a corollary issue, and under KRS Chapter 158, specifically KRS 158.070, there's an entire provision of law about setting a school calendar, number of instructional days, the fact that they're in-person days, limit on a maximum number of NTI days, and 158.070 subsection 9 limits it to maximum of 10 NTI days, for a calendar year. And so, that's the default. And so before you talk about 208, I think you have to be able to know where is the starting point. And then, of course, the governor has suspended those statutory provisions with one of his executive orders. And that suspension was good through September 2nd when the legislature passed, over the governor's veto, Senate Bill 1. And Senate Bill 1 did a bunch of things, but in particular, it said no more statutory suspension without the Attorney General's consent. And of course, the Attorney General has not consented to the suspension of the in-person instruction requirements. So there we go.
And I think too, as well, one of the things that they're pulling over the rules is saying, well, we're leaving it up to the school boards to decide with HB 208. And I think what people need to understand is school boards have always been able to decide. All the governor did was suspend the statutes you're talking about, allowing the school boards to now choose. Right. So if you have a problem with what the schools have been doing, you can't keep letting them decide, because all that's doing is continuing what we have to deal with.
One of the interesting debates, and anytime you come into a discussion with the legislators that want to defend this bill, is they allege local control. And my response to that is a bunch of nonsense. Ever since Rose, they're not allowed to have complete local control. The state is responsible for coming up with a system of common schools that have to be efficient, which means that there are basic standards in funding that the state puts in. The state gives state funding, and the state also establishes minimum standards of education And ever since, the follow-on arose, 1990, 1991, there has been a common calendar of in-person instruction that's been required. So this notion of we're going to go and let them defy the basic standards and keep the state funding flowing, I think is pretty disingenuous. And frankly, let's be honest, NTI is a debacle. I think it's interesting. Jefferson County schools want to talk about, racial equality. I mean, 23% of their students are failing, and most of them aren't the kind of well-to-do kids in the district. They're the impoverished. They're some of the minority kids that aren't getting the same opportunities with NTI that they need in person because they might not have the technology resources. And I look at that and I am like, wait a minute, you are failing our most at-risk kids continuing this NTI stuff. I haven't seen a racist policy like this since Brown versus Board. It's almost that bad because we're failing the kids that need the help the most. And the legislature, at least the House, wants to pass 208, and they want to say, well, local control. Look, they're making bad decisions, and frankly, they're making unconstitutional decisions. Even if 208 passes, the constitutional argument doesn't go away. It still is a violation of 168. For Jefferson County, you only get 2 days in-person instruction a week, and you get down to Paducah and you get 5. So you're not really fixing this issue by passing this bill. It doesn't sort of deal with the constitutional aspect of this lawsuit that we've got. And I look at it and I'm like, please stop saying that it helps the kids go back to school when in fact it takes away the requirement for them to be in school. I mean, just being honest with people.
Why are they saying, what is their angle that they're working where they're saying, no, it enables kids to go back to school? That is one thing I keep seeing them say. Is there any morsel of truth to that at all? Or is it literally just, they're just saying things?
I don't understand the argument. The only thing I can figure out is that if they're not back in school, they potentially lose funding and they need the funding to resume in-person instruction. But, nobody's ever, at least on kind of our side of the debate, ever said you can't have the funds. I mean, the funds the funds are coming out of the taxpayers' pockets anyways. It's not like there's a bill that, somehow takes away the taxpayers' requirement to pay because they're not providing the service that they're required to. That's not on the table. The only debate is where that money goes. It's still going to get collected. And at least from our side of the table, we're like, go ahead and, we know we're not going to reduce the funding or the impact on the taxpayer. But please provide the instruction that's required for the kids. And, I don't understand the argument that somehow this puts the kids back to school because it takes away the default of 5 days a week in-person instruction. So I don't get it.
Because when you go on to, so if I go into the Republican Party of Kentucky's page, and listen, I don't know if they're, once again, if they're just doing this to kind of cover themselves, but, one of the things they have up there is a graphic, maybe they removed it, where they say, fact and actually, I think
it was the Kentucky House Republicans that put up that.
Was the Kentucky House Republicans that put it up? Yeah, there it is. Kentucky House Republicans put up a graphic saying House Bill 208, myth, HB 208 keeps kids out of school. Fact, it does not allow school districts to remain closed. It mandates schools offer in-person instruction at least 80% of instructional time. Now, I think it's important to understand unless they have a 25 per 100,000 case count, right?
So let's be clear. It's 40% total for 80% of the time, which in fact turns out to be 2 days a week. So even that meme that they put out is inaccurate, right? It's what it requires is as of March 29th, unless it's over 25 cases per 100,000, which by the way is far more stringent than what the CDC just put out 2 weeks ago. But let's just put that aside for a minute. Even that meme that they just put out or that graphic's not accurate because in fact it's not 80% of the time. It's not like they got to be in school for 4 days a week. I don't think we would be howling if that was the case as much as we are. No, it's 2 days a week. And, that's the minimum that they put on this. And frankly, some school districts are going to do exactly that. And by the way, that is a difference of the default, which is 5 days a week, which is what it is right here and now today before that bill passes. So to say that, well, we're not keeping the kids out. No, you're just allowing the local districts to keep the kids out is what you're doing. And, you're doing it frankly, at a time when these kids are already behind the eight ball because they've been in NTI, at least in Jefferson County and some other school districts, since last March, right? Like 23% of the kids are failing in Jefferson County. And I look at this, our teachers, got vaccine priority. The governor gave them vaccine priority. Why the legislature isn't demanding what President Trump yesterday at CPAC indicated that needs to happen, which is the kids be back in school, I don't know. I look at it and I'm like, you guys are catering to special interests at the expense of our kids. And yeah, I'm going to howl about it. We've donated a bunch of pro bono time to take on the school reopening case, because I know that if these kids aren't in school, they are going to be a drain on society, a problem for society. They're not getting education. 10, 15 years from now, they're going to hit the taxpayers with more sort of, safety net support stuff. What lifts kids out of poverty is quality education. And we are denying it to the kids that are most at risk. And so that is why it's important to me to go and fight this fight to put the kids back in school. And that's why 208, in my opinion, as it stands, needs to fail.
Well, and I think too as well, a lot of and partially for me, I've heard people make the arguments to say, well, we just need to amend 208 in the Senate. And my personal opinion on that is they had the ability, they had amendments 2 and 4 that we were pushing for in the House that amend this to allow an NTI option to be made by the parents, not by the school board, and would fulfill their funding ask and everything else. And it would basically, I think, be the perfect of what everybody's looking for, that those who want to be able to keep their kids out can. Though, I'd argue even now, you can, if you want to keep your kids out of school, you can homeschool your kids still, so you can still pull them out if you want to. But I think what is important there is that they didn't pass it with the amendments. Instead, they added on another amendment that actually made it worse and would allow districts like Lexington, where if you have 25 per 100,000 cases, to remain out completely if they so choose. So
I don't know that that Amendment 5 was worse than the original bill. I would tell you that it wasn't worse than the original bill. The original bill allowed unlimited NTI through the end of the school year. At least the floor amendment, put them in school 2 days a week starting at the end of March, and only if the case count was below 25 per 100,000. But certainly, I think the entire bill is garbage because it's worse than the status quo, which is that the kids got to be in the classroom 5 days a week. Well,
and I would think that as well, once again, it makes it to where districts like Lexington and Jessamine County Public Schools and Fayette County Public Schools are able to stay closed under that amendment, as far as that goes. Now, I take a moment here. I think people need to understand, because obviously, I don't know if you can see the comments, I can. In the standard normal people calling for the time for school choice, keep schools closed, keep the kids out of it. And here's my first thought process about it. One, we know kids are committing suicide at 100% increased rate. We know that they're failing grades. It is clearly bad for their mental health. And for whatever reasons you want to blame it on to remain out of school. And though I think both me and you support school choice and the idea of school choice and would push for school choice, that doesn't have to be a separate issue from returning kids from in school. I think you can support both and still support school choice. I don't know. How do you respond to those people that are saying, keep the schools closed? We like them closed. They're all liberal indoctrination centers anyways.
So, first of all, you need to understand that there's a state constitutional right for them to be open and for the kids to get an education. And that, there's no constitutional amendment going on the ballot to change Section 169 of the Kentucky Constitution. Secondly, if you want to have a curriculum debate, if you want to have a debate on funding levels or alternatives for school choice, and there are bills that do those kinds of things, and I'm actually supportive of a lot of that. We private school our kids because we think the religious education is important that they get at the parochial schools for our children. But I look at this and I'm like, we are dealing with, a crisis it is not like the 23% of the kids that are failing in Jefferson County public schools are all of a sudden going to go and enroll in private schools because, all of a sudden they're all NTI as they've been for the last year. These are at-risk kids. And what people are screaming at and I'm sorry, I think it's mostly a political agenda. And by the way, the political agenda, I think flows a couple different ways. for political agenda on one side, they want to say, well, look at the public schools failing. We need more school choice. And on the other side, they're allowing it to continue because it's to the benefit of certain special interest groups. But, where are we going to be 10 years ago for these kids that are failing? Where are they going to end up? And what is that going to mean for the taxpayers? And nobody's looking at it from that angle, from the angle of what is in the best interest of these kids. Do I like necessarily the fact that, that there's levels of indoctrination, that, people putting out political related homework assignments that you look at and you see the stuff and you're like, what in the heck is wrong? With some of these public school assignments, none of that is good. But you got to look at the fact, to your point, we have mental health issues, suicides on the rise, kids, depression, mental health wards are full. University of Louisville Hospital, UK Hospital. You look around and if you don't see the existential crisis that is impacting the most at-risk kids, I can't help you. I mean, we can have a debate about school choice, school funding, curriculum later. But we got kids offing themselves over not being in the classroom and having social interactions. And I'm sorry, I'm going to advocate for them over every other issue right now. We can take up those other issues later. And a lot of people that are for those things will probably find an ally in me. But right now, I feel like I'm a triage doctor in the sense of we are dealing with kids that are really struggling and we got to help them.
Well, and I think too as well, I think a lot of times as people talk about this, they need to understand as well, the legislative calendar is off, right? So if a bill hasn't been proposed by now, it can't be proposed for another year.
Correct.
So you have to ask yourself, okay, we can't change a constitutional change for several years. We can't have, sorry about the construction noises. So we can't have a new bill to deal with public choice and funding that hasn't already been proposed. So what we have is what we have right now. And granted, yes, I think a lot of us would be for school choice. But as I said, just because you want kids learning in person doesn't mean you're necessarily against school choice. You just want kids learning in person. Next kind of question is about, was that HB 312 about open records requests? I haven't done much research about it. Could you give us an overview of the bill?
Yeah, so it changes the current open records law. It does a couple things. If you're from out of state, even if you're driving through Kentucky and you get into an auto accident, now you can't get a police report. So they're banning anyone from out of state from getting a record, even if it involves themselves, which I think is a problem. For a lot of reasons, because eventually what's going to happen is, states that do this are eventually going to start doing it to each other, kind of like the reciprocity war over concealed carry a few years ago, where, oh, you're not going to give me my reciprocity, I'm not going to give you, ours. And so I think we might see a race to the bottom in a society that travels a lot. I'm up in Cincinnati area, in northern Kentucky, and, a lot of people cross the bridge, go back and forth to work every day. So, I don't know that's a good thing. And I know what they're trying to stop. There's sort of some commercial requesters that come in and, do blanket requests. But, I think you could probably deal with that by allowing people out of state to at least request records about themselves. The other thing that they stop is if you're in any litigation, you can't get open records anymore. And what I find is some of our biggest watchdogs are in a lot of litigation. There's a guy up here by the name of Charlie Dietz. He has gone everywhere, to sort of ferret out what these health departments are doing. And he could be in litigation over aspects of that. The treasurer went out to do her report on the governor through a number of open record requests. But what if they don't turn it over? What if she's got to appeal to get the records? Now she can't get records anymore. So, there's no exception. I think they need to at least write one in on this aspect of the litigation exception to say, if it's a appeal involving or litigation involving an open records appeal or an open meetings appeal, then that doesn't count. At least then I would sit there and say, I'd grumble about it. But I'd be like, I could probably live with that. And then the other thing they do is they shut off all sort of records with the LRC. And, that takes a couple of different flavors. One flavor is people communicating with their legislators, whistleblowers communicating with legislators. That needs to be exempt, I think, and it kind of already is, although there's some litigation that may suggest that it's not. I mean, they could have tightened that up without sort of going overboard, which I think they did in 312. So 312 is another one of those bills I look at. I mean, it's not a open government kind of bill. It's not a good bill, at least if you're for transparent government. So,
what do you think I mean, looking at that and seeing that, these open records requests you have used in
I use frequently.
cases, yeah. What is and have been able to fight back against constitutional overreach, as well as hold accountable Andy Bashir and his bad decision making? What is the motivation they have behind 312? I mean, they just think it's a great time to do it, or what's the deal there?
I think you'd have to ask them. I mean, my firm spends a lot of time suing government on a lot of different issues, and obviously, we get a lot of stuff by open records, on behalf of clients and otherwise. And I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to do that anymore. I'll have to make my clients go and get the records before we file suit. It's going to be a pain, and it's probably not going to be good for vindicating constitutional rights. But and fundamentally, I mean, it's just not a pro, sort of transparent government kind of bill. So I think it's a bad deal. I mean, there's aspects of it that probably would have been okay, but they're trying to do with a sledgehammer what they could have done with a teeny tiny hammer, and to deal with things that probably needed to happen. So I look at that and I just think it's bad. It's just a bad bill. It's House Bill 312.
Let's see here. Who's the sponsor? Roland and Wesley on that one.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm just whenever I look at that, I'm always curious what is their thought processes on that. Meanwhile, while they're passing, trying to raise our gas tax, but passing, funding on crazy odd things like statutes, things like that. But and then we also have HB 360, which I haven't touched on a lot. That's an interesting one because it deals with me personally.
By the way, I think they're holding it because of you. I mean, I think House leadership is holding 360, and it's interesting because I have had some calls on that with the Kentucky Restaurant Association. I've had it with the Northern Kentucky chapter of the Kentucky Restaurant Association. I mean, it's a bill that the entire industry right now would love to comply with House Bill 1. But anybody that's got a liquor license is afraid of ABC. And the governor has made very, very clear that he is going to weaponize ABC and other governmental agencies to enforce this stuff. And
I mean, we still have a curfew in place.
Right. Right. I mean, and the curfew and the capacity restrictions are hitting the bars and the restaurants. And, they're not going to go and violate it if it risks their alcohol license. 360 would have kind of...
So you'd mentioned HB1. I think I've said it before, but, the argument is that some people have said is that HB1 is, even though a judge has restrained, I guess, the legislators from doing something on it, it's pretty unclear who's being restrained from what. And, if a person was to follow HB1, there perhaps is an argument to say that they're not being restrained from following what HB1 says because the governor, not the attorney general, went and got the restraining order against the legislators after they'd already passed the bill. And fundamentally, after legislators have overcome a veto and passed a bill, they don't do anything else with that bill.
But no restaurant's going to risk an alcohol license over, in an administrative enforcement, interaction with ABC, which, as you're aware of, is a pain in the rear end. And
we're dealing with them now, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, but nobody's going to risk that, to go and sort of reopen your business and start to turn a profit again, without a little bit more protection. And 360 just said, hey, look, no permit revocations for no fines. If what you're dealing with is a capacity restriction or hours of operation restriction, related to the COVID. And, I could tell you, I mean, you and I have had this discussion. I mean, your alcohol license, whatever. Okay. I mean, you might yank it. They might fine you, whatever. I mean, the care factor isn't that high, but I'm more concerned about, and I had a restaurant owner say to me, and this is in Northern Kentucky, and it's a big one. I mean, they're a big restaurant destination kind of place. And he said, we've been complying with everything all along. Unlike, and he made the point of you and Richard, Beans and Brute. And he's like, but I'm still not going to go and expand our capacity or our hours of operation even though the CDC, would allow us to do it as long as they can come in, because we think ABC is retaliatory. 360 would have fixed it. I think they're actually holding it because they don't want to help you. And I'm just kind of like, well, whatever. I mean, you guys again playing politics with our small businesses. I mean, it's the legislators being just as bad as Andy Beshear in some regards. And
I mean, when you look at the net result of what they've done, they've actually done nothing so far, because the courts have restrained HB1 for businesses. Now, SB1 and SB2 do something for schooling and some other things, but they really haven't done anything for small business at all. I remember when we were in the middle of the fight, Damian Thayer coming on and saying, "Oh, just hold on, help is coming." Well, what have you done to help us? You haven't actually done anything at all. There's still a mask mandate. There's still, not saying necessarily a mask mandate needs to go away, government force is bad. But, there's still a mask mandate. There's still a capacity restriction. There's still a curfew. There's still people like me whose licenses are still under administrative hearing because of these actions that we've done in fighting the governor. And they came on, he said to me, "Oh, don't worry, help is coming." They say, "We're going to rein them in. We're going to do it." And so far from what I've seen, they haven't actually done a thing.
No, and the stuff that and the meaningful stuff that they could do, like 360, they're playing politics with. And here's the problem, right? Anything that doesn't pass by next week can't sustain a veto override. So what they may do are any bills like that they don't really want to have passed, but they want to kind of take credit for. They play this political game of, we're just going to pass it on the last day so the governor vetoes it, and then we blame him for it, just like they did the abortion enforcement issue with Daniel Cameron last year. And I think that's a pretty disgusting thing for them to do. Anybody that watches them knows that they're playing politics, but it lets them go out, when they're campaigning for re-election, to say, "Look what we did." But
well, if they're campaigning for re-election, I mean, I talked about this earlier in another video, but only 19 out of 75 of the House reps had a primary opponent, and full on 1, 2, I think 3, 4 had no primary and no general opponent.
Yep.
I mean, Duplessis, who put forward the HB 508 gas tax bill, he has not had a primary opponent for 6 years, and he also was unchallenged in the general last year. So they do it because they know they can get away with it, because we're not holding them accountable in the primaries at all, because we're just not showing up to vote there.
So sure, and I've got a theory that people are paying attention right now like they never have before, but I think that theory is going to get tested over the course of the next year. We'll see what the primary cycle looks like in 2022. I mean, I look at this stuff and I'm just like, look at the unemployment debacle that's going on. Now, they just passed a bill. I don't think it's gone through both chambers yet, but I think the Senate just passed a bill to sort of allow them to forgive, people who relied on Andy Beshear's statements about whether or not they qualified for unemployment, to sort of, to be exempt from the requirement to pay it back. But it's discretionary, right? Like, why wouldn't you mandate that? Why wouldn't you say, wait a minute, if somebody relied on public statements by Andy Beshear in getting unemployment, and now, they've had the rug pulled out from under them, we're going to mandate that they can't be, recouped upon or be forced to pay it back. And they've not done that. And I feel like in a lot of ways, they really could be advocating for the people. Look at the unemployment thing. I mean, we still have claims that are 6-8 months out. I mean, I look at that and I'm like, why would you not provide a bill that lets these folks file an action in their local district court, handle like a small claims matter with their employer or former employer and the UI folks, and let those UI folks come in and defend their stuff, and you could start to at least move this stuff through the court system in a relatively inexpensive way, so that we're not continuing to have people, that are literally struggling, help. And I look at it and what I see is just sort of a general, politic playing down there instead of doing what's right for the people of Kentucky. And it just really infuriates me.
So, and do you think, speaking of, so part of why you're seeing, if you look nationally at the restaurants that are standing up to these lockdowns, you're seeing a lot of coffee shops.
Right.
And a part of the big part of the reason why is because coffee shops typically don't sell a lot of beer or don't have a liquor license like us, right? And so they don't really care as much about that going away. So, beer sales make up a portion of our sales. Obviously, it's something we offer. But, you know, as we've spoken before, it was kind of if it has to be a collateral damage of everything that's been going on, to push back and show that the governor, if we can stand up and we fight, the governor doesn't have last say so, then so be it. It's a sacrifice that has to be made. But to not pass a bill just simply because you don't like the fact that I hold you accountable to your platform, because I'm like, hey, you know, call me far right, but raising taxes just seems like a bad call. You know?
I mean, we had this discussion, and I don't want to get into privileged discussions, but I mean, I think you are prepared and are still prepared to pay whatever price is necessary for your license. But you know, there are restaurants that are hanging on by a thread. I mean, at least if they don't want to help you and they want to help all the rest of the industry, then at least make it forward looking to where, you know, they can't yank permits or impose fines for anything going forward. And at least that'll help the rest of the darn industry, you know, and they can play their politics with you, but they're not even doing that, right? They're just holding a bill and allowing these restaurants that have been kicked in the teeth to keep getting kicked in. And I don't think it's right. I think what they're doing is wrong. You know, I don't think they think that the public's going to hold them accountable. I guess we'll see next year, you know, how that goes.
Well, you know, same old typical politics is, one, you don't have people expanding it and showing and people watching what they're doing and then informing the general public, like, this is what they're doing.
Right.
You know, you need to hold them accountable. And as I brought up earlier in a conversation, you know, parties are just made up of people. And, you know, just because you slap a new title on a party doesn't mean those people are any less flawed, and they're going to go off the path from where they're supposed to go. And it's up to individuals to hold them accountable if you want them to stay on a path. And just slapping new titles on flawed people doesn't mean you're going to get a different result. Right. You know, and that's just personal stance. I know, you know, you may feel differently, but just a personal stance I have there. So anything else, Chris, that you want to hit upon?
No, we're, you know, hopefully people are calling on House Bill 208. We ought to try and stop 312 in the Senate, stop 208 in the Senate. And then I think we need to nudge them on 360. And again, if they don't want to help Brood, whatever, at least make it forward looking for every other restaurant. Right. And, you know, a bar out there that's already struggling to help the rest of the industry if they don't want to help you. Although I will say this, there's probably, because I looked into it, I think there's something like 50 or 60 other bars and restaurants that were not compliant with the governor's COVID mandates that they're also sort of sticking it to. I mean, but whatever. I mean, I'm more concerned, frankly. You know, we did a hearing last summer, and we're going to lose probably 30% of our bars and restaurants permanently in the Commonwealth. I mean, you know, this is the kind of stuff where, I mean, these guys are playing politics with people's livelihoods, and it's just not right.
And not only that, but to hold it back because they want to hurt me when, as we've kind of discussed, it's really not that much of a damage to me.
Right.
I mean, if you think you're doing it to hurt me, you're really not. I'm not that damaged by it at all. You know, so what? It happens. Oh no, I gotta change my logo, or I have a funny story about why there's a beer bottle in the logo, right?
Or your wife's got to own the new LLC, whatever. I mean, we've already figured out a way around ABC's nonsense anyway. So, right. You know, I look at it, I'm like, come on, this is just stupid. So,
right, it is, and it's saying to every single restaurant that you've said, I'm going to help you out. They took Fernando from the Restaurant Rescue Coalition. They brought him onto the floor, paraded him in front of everybody as he said he's been arrested in Cuba for making sandwiches. And then they sit there and they don't even bother to help him at all. They can't even name a piece of legislation that has taken effect that actually helped him. And that has been the entire story going into it.
Yep. Yeah, now they're holding the bill that probably, you know, would provide the most relief, in my opinion, to the industry.
And they're sitting on it because, well, you know.
Because you're mean.
I'm mean.
You're shining a light on them, and they don't like it. You're mean.
They don't like that they can't get away with it. So, well, thank you, Chris, for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Yeah, sure. I'll see you.
See you, sir.